You're an adult and into everything else that you do. Okay, I'm gonna like, oh, here. Well, you are adults in the world now. Like, if you're not 18, you're gonna be 18 soon, and you're part of this discussion. But in your own terms, right? Yeah. All right, attack. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's not what you said. I like, no, I need to play great. Great rest. Cahill, Campbell, Coleman, Corby, April, Livingston, Richard, Connor, or Lockheed, Morgan, O'Brien, Pickering, Urban, Whitfield. So the only one we're missing is Shay. Okay, I'll tell you what. See, thank you very much.
Yeah, I got a problem. Yet again, another technology problem. I mean, not surprising, guys. We'll get by without it. But let me go back to the regular camera. I know. I'm trying to use this document projector thing, but it's not going to work for me. So I can make do without it, and I'll get back to you. I'll send you this document through email or through Blackboard so that we kind of have a firm understanding of what I'm talking about. I'm going to add some things to our conversation today. Are you guys seeing me on a split screen?
Yeah.
Are you?
You're like a picture in the bottom corner. That was the free.
All right, let me trade. All right, if I change over to this document camera, do you still see me, or do you just see the document?
We do not see the document. We only see you in the small picture in the corner.
I don't know why that's happening, but let me click on something else and see if that takes us back. Anything changing for you?
No, same.
How about no? No. Let me make a quick phone call and I'll just ask somebody to come up here.
All right, seriously,
It's okay.
Somewhere where you can be.
Yeah. And I didn't get a phone signal. All right. Well, we don't need that. We can just operate without this. All right. So what I want to do is I want to talk to you about what's in the chapter reading for how to avoid plagiarism. One of the key components of your college experience is going to be figuring out how to avoid plagiarism. We struggle with this, as I mentioned to you in the past. We struggle with this all the time. So there's an expectation that you're going to come to class with some knowledge of how to avoid plagiarism. And one of the things that happens, I think, with plagiarism in many cases is that students don't really know how to go about writing a research paper, and so they make a critical mistake of using information that they think is relevant to research paper writing, but they really don't manage it effectively. And this is the problem I think that we're having across college campuses today, where people are taking the wrong approach to how to write a research paper. For example, if I told you to go to the library and write a research paper about something like photosynthesis or something like that, I mean, you would end up writing a paper. I don't know what this is doing up here. You would end up writing a paper. Are you guys still there? I lost him.
Hello?
Hey, all right, you're there.
Hello?
Okay, I hear you. I don't see you. I'm back to normal on my side.
You're normal on your side too.
Okay. Whew. Okay. So, well, let me just continue my thought. So, what happens is that if I told you to write a research paper on photosynthesis, many of you would just run to the library and grab every book off the shelf on photosynthesis and essentially just reproduce a bunch of information that's already been known. And as research writers, and as when you get to college, we're not interested in knowing what's already known. If I want to read something about photosynthesis, I can go to the library and pull those books off the shelf myself, right? What we're interested in is what can you add to the conversation? In other words, we know that certain things are written. We know that certain people are making arguments and people have got ideas out there, but how do we contribute to that? Research writing should never be about summarizing what we already know. Research writing should be taking the sources that we have, the information that we have, and using that to help us make new contributions or to make new arguments. So think about your research from the perspective of what we're doing now. What we're doing here is you've already established that there's an argument to be resolved when it comes to reading these stories. You're already finding that there's research out there that's going to help you contribute to those arguments. Now, you know what side of the argument you want to defend. And now you've got to go out there and make some sense out of the research that's contributing to the argument in the same ways that you are. So you're going to be using your idea as the foundation for the paper. And you're using the research to kind of come in and help you make your argument. And if you find that the research is working against you, well, then you've got to have some kind of intellectual challenge with that. You can't just ignore it. You've got to understand that people are going to be arguing on both sides of this issue, so you just got to make some sense of it. My concern about what I've seen so far with your ideas about how to use sources is that you tend to just be going into the sources and finding a quote and then like stapling that quote in the middle of a paragraph or even in the middle of a sentence sometimes, just for the sake of getting someone else's idea out there. And what the chapter 38 says, and you don't have to go to the textbook, I just want you to just pay attention, write down this page number for when you're doing nothing on Friday night, you can open up this book and read this, right? So on page 497, we make the text tells you that we need to be introducing sources. And I think that's a key component to this. When you introduce the source, you're not in a position to just repeat what the source says. You should put yourself in a position to describe what the author did. That's the key to research writing. When you're adding research to these arguments that you're writing, you are adding in the author's ideas. So swiping a quote from a source, that's not necessarily relevant, right? Sure, if the author's whole paper and research can be summarized in half a sentence or in one sentence, well, then maybe that makes some sense, but I'm sure it can't. So what the text tells you in 497 is to introduce your sources, and they give you a bunch of ways to do this, right? They talk about according to the author's name, right? I mean, that's a great way to set yourself up to talk about what the author did, right? Because again, write it down, put it on your bathroom mirror, write it on your hand, I don't care what you do, but make the point known to yourself that you need to be describing what the author does in their study that's relevant to your argument. Sure, are all of these research articles talking about different things and not doing the same thing? Yes, that happens. But they're ultimately, you're going to find ways that they're using this different ways of interpreting the stories to make your argument or to make the same arguments that you're making. So introduce your sources, make sure that you're describing what the author did, and if you have to use language from the author, okay, that's when you use the direct quote. So if you can flip over the page and you can see on 497 and 498, they tell you all about how to introduce sources. But on 499, they talk about the introduction of direct quotes. Now, all of you are in a habit of using direct quotes and trying to make those direct quotes part of your research paper, which is fine. But if highlight these words or do something to make sure you remember this, right in the middle, underneath those 3 bulleted points on 499, the text says, keep quotations as short as possible and make them an integral part of your text. as short as possible, right? I don't want to read block quotes. This is a short research paper. Block quotes aren't going to be relevant to a short research paper. If you're writing something big and, you know, kind of chapter length work, okay, maybe direct quotes would be relevant. But if you have to borrow that much text from a source, you need to be paraphrasing that information. We're going to talk about paraphrasing on Friday. All right, so today we're going to be discussing direct quotes, and I just want to talk to you about how to avoid plagiarism using direct quotes, because you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm using direct quotes so I don't get hit for plagiarism. Well, they can create the same kind of problems with plagiarism as a paraphrase. So if I have any advice for you, it's to follow that advice and to keep them short, right? Use only pertinent pieces of the text that are going to contribute to your argument, because maybe the author has said it in an artful way, or maybe it's something that just fits in neatly with your sentence structure. Whatever it is, you can use them. I'm just going to tell you, keep them short, keep them focused, and make sure that they're contributing to your argument. You should be in the habit of pretty much synthesizing these research articles down. What I'm interested in reading from you is kind of your overall assessment of the author's work. In other words, when you read a source, you need to be introducing that author and telling me what that author is doing to contribute to your argument, right? So putting yourself in the position to describe the source, that should be priority number one. Any questions on that before we move on to anything else? Avoid the block quotes. You don't need to be doing that. Priority number two is on page 500, where right in the top of the page, underneath that direct quote, it says, when modifying a quotation, be sure not to alter its essential meaning. All right, we need to talk about this, because altering essential meaning is another way of saying plagiarism. So what I've got, and I'm going to try to transfer over to my document projector here in a minute, but I just want you to know that there's two marks of punctuation that you need to get familiar with. One is the ellipsis, which is the dot, 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 and the other one is a brackets, right, which is just a squared off brackets, not parentheses, brackets. All right, an ellipsis allows you to take information out of a quote, right, in order to make the quote readable, or in order to make the quote relevant to what you're trying to do. So the ellipsis is a mark of punctuation that shows that information is missing from the inside of one of your quotes, or maybe from the end of your quote or from the beginning of the quote. Doesn't matter. It just shows that if you're using a sentence length piece of information from a source, if you're modifying that quote, you got to tell the reader that you're modifying that quote. For example, I had a really interesting situation happen a few years ago. I was talking about this rule of how to use the ellipsis, and I said, look, if you need to change the words in the quote in order to, help you manage that information, you've got these two marks of punctuation. The brackets show where information has been added or changed. The ellipsis shows that information has been deleted. Okay, so those two marks of punctuation, I'm sitting there telling my class that these two things were happening. So the student was writing a paper, and she's essentially arguing something that I know is she's on a side of the argument that I know is very difficult to support. The research out there has not really been supportive of what she's trying to do. So she keeps, and I can't remember what she was arguing, but let's just, for the sake of this class, just put it into perspective. She was trying to tell me that the world was flat, right? And I know that the world is round. Right, so she's going through this process of writing her paper, and she kept referring to these sources, and I was pretty familiar with the research that she was using, and like every time she got into using these sources, she kept writing, the world is ... flat. And I kept thinking to myself, what is she doing? How come she keeps putting these ellipses in there? And so what was happening was that she had articles that said that the world is not flat, and she was using the ... to take out the word not, right? So essentially, she was just saying the world is ... flat in order to help her make her argument. She was manipulating the author's ultimate purpose, right? She can't do that. She can't change the author's intended meaning. So the point that we need to take away from this is that the ellipses and the brackets help you modify the quotes, but you can't change the meaning of the quotes. You can't change the author's intended message. So when you start manipulating text, you start using quotes, right, you've got to be very aware of what you're doing to that quote and whether you're changing the author's perspective or not. We should have really less reliance on quotes and more reliance on just paraphrasing, synthesizing, and describing the author's arguments, because the quotes can get us into trouble. All right, so I'm going to try to switch over to this document projector. If it doesn't work, I can come back to something different, but I'm going to try and switch over and see if this thing actually comes up. Can you see that? Hey.
Yeah.
All right, I know that things will eventually work around here. All right, so here's a couple of things to think about. All right, when you're introducing sources, now I don't want you to pay attention to these 1s and 2s that are on here. This is a different type of format. We use the MLA style, so we would be putting page numbers in at the end of these things, right? So don't pay attention to these little superscript numerals on here. But what you could say is that Jones, in his article entitled whatever, suggests that, and then you can just use the words from the text in order to finish your sentence, right? This is what we talk about when we say we're integrating language of the author into our sentence structure, right? We're using a few words of the author to kind of blend in with our sentence in order for the sentence to make sense. You still have to maintain the sentence structure. It still has to be a sentence. You can't just tape a quote in there and have the sentence not be a sentence anymore, right? You still have to pay attention to rules of grammar, but ultimately this is a good way of thinking about how we're going to manage text, right? If you're going to be taking text right out of the middle of a sentence or something like that, you put the ellipses in there to show that you're taking information out, right? So essentially, you can do it that way, right? Jones suggests that, and then you just put here your ideas to finish your thought. Or you could say Jones and Smith demonstrated something in their article, and then put a colon, and then because you've got a complete sentence and you've ended that sentence with a colon, now you can go and put maybe a sentence length work from the author or something like that to explain the author's, using a direct quote in order to explain the author's position. So you can do it by just adding a few words into your sentence. You can do it by just ending your sentence with a colon and then putting your direct quote in. Or you could do, as in this case right here, Jones et al. This means you've got 3 authors, right, or more. You can say Jones et al. Et al. Is Latin for and others, right? Jones et al. Believe that something may be a factor in this argument, right? And so what I've got here is they believe, comma, and then I have my sentence. So there's 3 different ways that you should be approaching the direct quote. It's either blend a few words in with your sentence structure, end your sentence and give me the quote, or tell me that the authors believe something and then give me your sentence length quote. All right? So those are kind of the 3 ways that you should be managing directly quoted information. Anybody having a problem with this so far? Now, most of you have done a pretty good job of blending these quotes in. I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page here. Some people have struggled with this in the past. Now we need to toe the line on this and make sure that everybody's doing the same thing. So if you struggled with using direct quotes in the past, get with somebody who has done it correctly and look at what they've done. Read some other people's works and see what they have done. All right. There's a couple of other things that are going to be problematic about direct quotes, and I just want to kind of slide down on this paper a little bit and show you kind of a sample. Now, I'm going to try and make this fit. Here's a passage about drowsy driving, right? And this is a bunch of information that came from the Journal of Auto Safety. Not that that matters, but it's just kind of a generic thing for us to talk about. And what I've got down here is what we call unacceptable uses of quotations, which lead to essentially plagiarism. So this is a whole passage up here about drowsy driving, about drinking, and being around the holidays where people are falling asleep at the wheel, and that all these things are a danger to people, and that a lot of people do this drowsy driving thing and can end up getting hurt. Well, in this first example right here, what I want you to see, it says many hazards in the road are caused by sleepy drivers. Notice that there's no citation after that. There's nothing that's telling me that that belongs to anybody, and I don't think you need to put a citation there because I think everybody knows that drowsy drivers cause accidents. But what happens after this is a problem, right? And the problem is this. This is just a sentence. The risk of dozing off behind the wheel is greater than ever. This comes from the source, right? Here it is. The risk of dozing off behind the wheel is greater than ever. It's in the middle of this passage right here. But this is plagiarism because the author did not say that there's some kind of epidemic of drowsy driving going on. What the author said was that if we're talking about holiday preparations, people cheating on sleep, and drinking at parties, then we have this cocktail that is creating the risk of dozing off behind the wheel. So by this person not showing me that information was taken out of the middle of the sentence, right? This is plagiarism because what this person wrote right here is not accurate. Brody, who's the author of this article, did not say that the risk of dozing off behind the wheel is greater than ever. Brody said that with all these other factors, the risk has increased. Understand what I'm doing here? The use of the quotes cannot manipulate what the author said. And this is a bad practice anyway. Let me tell you why, right? It's a bad practice of just taking a quote and pasting it into your paragraph, right? You don't need the authors to write your paper for you, right? What you should be doing is blending that quote in with your sentence structure or just paraphrasing that point out, right? If you find that you are in the middle of a paragraph and that you end your sentence and then you just add a sentence in from the author, that's a bad practice because there's usually a coherence gap associated with that. Probably not reasonable to think that your sentence and someone else's sentence are on the exact same mental plane in order to make the perfect transition between the two. So with that lack of transition comes the coherence gap. I need you to understand it's bad practice to just staple a quote in the middle of a paragraph. You need to manage that information out. All right, so let's take a look at that. So that sentence is bad all the way around. I wouldn't even try to fix it. I would just say, look, that's plagiarism because that's not what the author intended, and it was bad practice to begin with. We've got another problem with this example down here. It says researchers have determined that it may lack the drama of drunken driving, but drowsy driving can be just as deadly. So here's the original sentence up here. It may lack the drama of drunken driving, but drowsy driving is even more common and can be just as deadly. So obviously there's a bunch of words in here that have been taken out. This does not show that those words were taken out. Therefore, this is not being true to the author's cause. You would have to use the ellipsis to take out the words even more common and before you finish that thought. All right, so you can see that this person is not doing a good job. You can also see that the original I on it was capitalized, but in the quote, the I on it is not capitalized, right? This would have to be, if you're going to use this sentence right here, this would have to be capitalized, or if you're going to change it, you need to put that I in brackets to show that you changed it. Does everybody understand what's happening here? You use the ellipses to take certain words out, make it more readable. You use the brackets to change it, especially punctuation or capitalization or something like that, right? If you're managed, or verb tense and capitalization. Everybody with me on this? I need everybody to be nodding in agreement to be able to tell me that they can avoid plagiarism, right? Because the last thing you want to get from me is this paper returned to you saying, look, you don't know how to manage research. You're just, you're creating plagiarism, because creating plagiarism is an objective, or we're trying to teach you how to avoid plagiarism. That's one of the foundational objectives of this course, information literacy. You need to know how to use research in order to participate in the college classroom. Okay. So there's one more issue here at the bottom of the page, and I just want you to see this, right? And it says that, in the past, weary drivers would stop at highway rest areas to nap, but the future may bring some changes. That sentence is not cited, so that's okay, because that's not a factor of his work. But it says here, if current trends continue, such rest areas in some states have become high crime areas that they should avoid. And if you take a look up here, it says that those highway rest areas in some states have become high crime areas. Well, the problem is the verb tense, right? That this says if the trends continue, the rest areas, we should change this to will become high crime areas, right? Because we need to be talking about what's going to happen in the future. The problem is we can't change this verb tense right here to will become, because Brody is not making predictions in the future in his article. He's not saying this is going to happen. He's saying that they currently are a problem of crime. So you've got to be careful. When you start to manipulate verb tense, just ask yourself, am I changing the author's intended message? If you're taking words out of a quote, you've got to ask yourself, am I changing the author's intended message? If you're manipulating the quote in any way, with brackets, with ellipses, it doesn't matter. Always ask yourself, am I changing the author's intended message? direct quotes, you may think are the key to saving you from being accused of plagiarism, but if you change the author's intended meaning, then you can be accused of plagiarism. Everybody with me on that? Okay, good. I mean, because plagiarism is a huge problem in college campuses today. And it's because of this kind of proliferation of information that we get across the internet. Now, you should know, right, that I take all of your papers and I submit them to turnitin.com. I don't know if you're familiar with what turnitin.com is. Do you have turnitin.com there, Ms. Worrell?
We do not have it here. We don't subscribe to it. I bought it 1 year, but it was a little too expensive.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, but we use it. A lot of, almost every college in the country uses it. And just so you know, right, I mean, turnitin.com is the silver bullet. It's the thing that all of us were waiting for. Remember, Ms. Worrell was talking the other day about how exciting it is to be at your age because technology has made research so easy for you. Well, technology has made it a million times easier for us to catch cheaters now, right? And what turnitin.com does is it's a resource where we take your papers and we submit them to this website, and then the search engine that's associated with this website does a search of your paper against every other paper that's ever been submitted to turnitin.com, as well as the research that's out there in electronic format. So pretty much anything that you're using, this thing is searching against. So if it finds that you are using words exactly from a source, or if you're referencing a source, it will link me to that source, and it sends me an originality report. I send your paper in, about 30 seconds later, it sends me back the paper with an originality report on it, and the originality report tells me how much percentage of the paper it thinks it's plagiarized, right? I just had a student's paper I was looking at this morning, 37% plagiarized, right? 37% seems like a really high number. Well, what had happened was that she was using a lot of direct quotes in her paper, and a lot of her references were referenced in other sources. So it looked like 37% of her paper was plagiarized, but in actuality, it wasn't, right? But then again, I've seen other papers where only 2% of the paper was plagiarized, and that 2% actually turned out to be someone who took an idea from somebody but didn't give them credit. So the number on the percentage of originality report doesn't matter. It's the quality of the information that's there. So I just want you to know, and if any of you are ever interested in looking at this, I mean, you can create your own turnitin.com accounts because you're Damon students. If you use your Damon email, you can create a turnitin.com account, and you can submit your own papers up there, and you can have that thing send it back to you, your originality report, so you can find out just how much of your paper is plagiarized. I'm going to do it for you, right? I just had a problem with that the other day. I had a student who submitted a paper to turnitin.com, and then she submitted the paper again, and when she submitted it again, it showed up on my website as being 100% plagiarized. And it's because the paper did a search and found her own paper. So it looked like she had copied herself. So obviously, go ahead.
Is that, you guys do as Damon, do you persecute for self-plagiarism?
No, with self-plagiarism, we don't. But I mean, what we find is that it's kind of a learning experience. It's almost like unethical to submit a paper for one class and then submit the same paper for another class. So if we find that someone was kind of doing that, or using large chunks of their own work, I mean, what we will do is we will just have a conversation with them about, first of all, very rarely do professors give the similar assignments that would precipitate that. Right, I think that's part of what we would look at was someone trying to use a paper that really didn't fit the assignment and just try to make it work. That would be one thing that we would talk about. But ultimately, let me get back to my camera. Ultimately, the point that we as a college want to make is that we don't want our students thinking that it's okay to just use papers for different classes. We want them to recognize that originality of the work is important, and that you should be doing. Now, if a professor gives you the green light to go do that, then go. I mean, a lot of times students will come to me and say, hey, I wrote a paper on this subject before, and I want to use some of the research on that for my next paper. And I would say, yeah, sure, go ahead and do it. But they're not going to just copy and paste chunks of their previous papers into another paper, because that wouldn't be right. Okay. All right. So So I guess I just want to recap some of the things that we talked about today, because the textbook is saying the same things that I'm saying. It's just doing it in such a condensed manner that I don't think you understand the nuances or the specifics that can create these types of problems. So put yourself, number one, in the position to describe what the source is doing. This is page 497, right? Introduce the source. Tell me what they're arguing. Show me how that evidence is backing up your evidence. And then, so use those types of phrases. According to Jones in his article, in Jones, or in this article, Jones determines that. Jones argues this. Jones thinks that the grandmother was evil, right? Do that. Put those authors need to become part of your conversation. But you don't do it by just stealing their ideas. You do it by describing what they're doing, right? So if you're introducing that source and you're throwing those page numbers in there with your in-text citations, you're in great shape. You have nothing to worry about. Secondly, though, keep those direct quotes short. If you have to use direct quotes, make sure they're short and make sure that they are important parts of your sentence structure. Make them meaningful parts. Don't just take quotes in the middle of a paragraph. Don't take quotes in the middle of a sentence. Don't let quotes be their own sentence in a paragraph. Integrate those words from the author into your sentence structure. Describe the source and then use a few words of the author, of what he did, in order to help drive home your point, right? In other words, don't let the source write your paper for you. You can do that. You're the one who's making the argument. You're the one who've got, you've got something to say. Just use the research as a support tool. From that point, it's all about trying to manage those direct quotes. And the key here is not to alter essential meaning. You've got ellipses, you've got brackets. Those can help you alter the quote, but you can't change the author's meaning. You can't tell me that the world is flat when the authors are telling me that the world is round, or the world is not flat. Questions, comments, concerns? Do you have anything to say? I know this is an abbreviated class today, so I'm trying to wrap this up quickly. So I know we've got a few minutes. Ultimately, I just wanted to say this is a key component of this research writing process. I need to see this represented when you're writing these papers. On Friday, I'm going to talk to you about paraphrasing, which is what I would consider to be a better strategy, because you're just kind of summarizing things down. Okay, Doug, go ahead.
You don't have a school Friday.
Prevention Day, we have prevention.
Thank you for telling me that.
I thought that was on the schedule.
Yeah, I completely forgot about that one. All right, so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to drop this paper back a day.
Lecture, we can read the lecture out tomorrow.
Okay, I mean, that might not be a bad thing to do. You want me to just do a recording and then send it to you tomorrow? You guys can just watch that?
Yeah, you can slow it down, because on the board I put a couple very simple examples of how to use ellipsis and brackets.
Okay.
Reinforce that, and because they'll have the long weekend to work on the paper, but I don't want to lose any more days.
Yeah, me either. Yeah. That's okay. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll do that paraphrase lecture, and I'll put it into the YouTube account and send it to you. Ms. Warren, I'll send it to you, and I'll try to copy everybody else on it. But for right now, I'll just work on trying to do it. I'm trying to go back to my office. Essentially, I'm going to boil this down to something short and sweet, and that is I'm going to give you 6 steps to follow in order to do this. I mean, I think the textbook tells you how to do it. It's always good to read the textbook and hear it from them too. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you kind of 6 easy to follow steps to create an effective paraphrase. But I also wanted to show you some examples of what not to do, because there are some bad things that can happen with plagiarism and paraphrasing too. And it all has to do with representing the author accurately, right? I mean, you can't write a paraphrase that doesn't accurately represent the author's ideas. All right, are any other questions out there? Okay. All right, well, you will see me on video tomorrow, on the video recording, and then I will be in class on Monday looking over your shoulders to see what kind of drafts you've got written, because the paper is due on Friday or on Wednesday. Right? editing day on Wednesday, final draft due on Wednesday, or I'm sorry, editing day on Monday, final drafts due on Wednesday. That shouldn't be surprising to anyone. It's on the syllabus. Yes, question.
We got it. Okay. Nope, I think we are maintaining, we are overwhelmed, but we are maintaining. We are appropriately whelmed at this time, but we don't want to get swept away.
Yes, look, every day we're adding more to your repertoire, and this is kind of the speed that things operate on, and you just got to be willing to, for every hour of class, there's an expectation you're doing 2 hours of prep work on the outside. You're doing the thinking, you're doing the writing, you're doing the reading. I mean, that's the expectation. It's not as much of, I mean, it's the reason why class is held every other day, right, in college, because we need to separate things out. You have the fortunate experience of having Miss Warrow helping you out on the off days. So you should, you actually have a huge advantage.
And think of this as like a video game. When you start playing Super Mario Brothers 3, they told you how to play the game. We went through how to play the game in the first 2 or 3 papers, and now you're playing the game. You're on level 7. You
That's
have
right.
classes. We're on level 7. It's getting harder. Bowser's ready to crush it.
All right, well, that sounds good. All right, well, I'll put together that video, put it on email to you, and then we'll see you next Monday.
All right, Dr. Cherryberry, thank you so much for your time and for meeting this weird thing.
Yeah, that's okay. We can always make it work. Thanks again. All right, see ya.
Thank you.